In this lesson, we're going to learn how to move our audience from point A to point B, point A being the place where they're starting from, point B being the place that we want them to end up based on the argument that we want to make. And the metaphor I use for this is guiding them across the river. When you write an argument or speak an argument, you're ultimately trying to create change. And I think that's a really important thing to remember. When I read your arguments or whenever I encounter a student topic or their ideas about their argument, I'm always looking for what is that movement you're trying to create. You're trying to create a change in what you want the audience to think, feel, or do. So point A is what they currently think, feel, or do, and point B is what you want them to think, feel, or do. If you're not trying to create this change in your audience, then you really have no purpose for writing. So this comes back a little bit to topic selection and audience selection, but if you think about it as a movement, I want my audience to go from here to here, and you can state that in a sentence, then that helps you check in and know that you actually are writing something that is an argument. Your job as the writer is to meet your audience where they are and to thoughtfully guide them across the river. So you'll see that I have here, the emojis are the audience. The emoji on the left-hand side looks skeptical. And what you want to do is step by step, stone by stone, take them across the river to the emotion that you want them to have, right? So maybe you want them to feel something different. Maybe you want them to think something. Maybe you want them to do something. You have to really get into the perspective of your audience and meet them where they are. Much of this lesson is really about the structure and organization of argument. And I cannot overstate the importance of this concept, both in terms of your writing and then later when we start really analyzing other people's texts, how they've organized theirs. That if we think of all text as a way of creating some kind of change, we can identify the subtle movements, the small steps, the little stones that are meant to guide us from point A to point B. The first step is to figure out where your audience is right now, especially regarding the subject and, in many cases, the speaker. Consider their knowledge, beliefs, and values. Show them that you understand their position. Try to start from a common place. Again, that's a belief, value that you have in common with the audience and identify with them. This is, in my river metaphor, the equivalent of reaching out your hand for them to hold on to and saying, I'm with you. Now come with me. Step 2 is to think about the aspect of the argument that will be the next stepping stone. So you can't expect your audience to leap all the way across the river to the most challenging part of the argument. You want to think about your argument in pieces, how you're going to move them. So you want to move them one small step at a time closer to fulfilling your purpose. This should be something that's fairly easy to convince them of based on where they started. So I'll return for a moment to the example of my son trying to convince my husband and I to get him a phone. And a common place that we have is the desire for him to be a little bit more independent. And so that is likely where he would start. If he's doing a good job with his argument anyway, is to talk about the importance of independence, especially as he attends middle school, perhaps to talk about some of the possibilities that exist for him to become involved in activities, because that is something else that we're always talking to him about, how he needs to do more than be on the iPad all day long. So if he starts from there and then thinks about, okay, I can get my audience to agree with this. And once I get them to agree with that, where's the next small thing I can get them to agree with? So if he gets us to agree, yes, I should be more independent. The next step, part of that independence is me being able to stay after school from time to time when I want to participate in an activity. Then step 3, to whatever, so however many you need, is to repeat that step. Step 2, as many times as you need. Base your decision on where they are now. So, for example, once my son gets us to agree that yes, he should be able to stay after school, then the next thing he might try to convince us of is that he's going to need a way to communicate with us to let us know that that's happening, that he's going to be staying after school. Because another value that we share is safety and knowing that he is okay. And then, he'll keep making those small arguments that we're going to be like, yeah, okay, I agree with that part. Okay, yeah, I'm with you there. And ideally, you're able to do that all the way to the end so that by the time you get them to that, here's what I really want. I want you to get me a phone. You've already gotten me convinced that that is the necessary next step. How many stones you have, and stones is another word for sub-argument, and that's a word that I'm going to use a lot. It's the idea of taking your big argument and breaking it down into the smaller pieces. So how many of those you have is going to depend on how far your audience has to travel to agree with you. How much distance is there between point A and point B? Finally, remember that your argument is not about you, the writer. It is about the audience. What do they already know, believe, and value? How can you tap into those things to achieve your purpose? What additional knowledge might they need? How does your suggestion relate to their values? Don't start from what you think. You have to get into their shoes. So writing effective argument is really a huge exercise in developing empathy and understanding of another person's position. That might be the most essential piece of creating effective argument. And that, it's probably obvious, but I'll say it anyway. Make sure that you're writing clearly and effectively. You want to bring in not just clear sentence structures, but powerful ones. And I will, over time, be giving you some more lessons on some of those, but many of you already know them. Some of you know them intuitively. Some of you know them from seeing them in other people's writing. And some of you maybe aren't comfortable with them yet. And that's okay. Do your best. But just remember that the concepts are important, but the way that you phrase the concepts and the way that you arrange the sentences is also important to the power of what you're saying. So please don't underestimate that aspect of the argument.